Stop. Latinx and Hispanic are not interchangeable. Many people misuse the word Hispanic when they mean to refer to old people from Latin America. Want to learn more? Raisa Planned Parenthood Advocates of Oregon brought in storytellers to speak on their experiences identifying as Latinx but not Hispanic in the U.S. The Oxford Dictionary defines the term Hispanic as relating to Spain or to Spanish speaking countries, especially those of Central and South America, or relating to Spanish speaking people or their culture, especially in the U.S. The Oxford Dictionary defines the term Latinx as a person of Latin American origin or descent. The word Hispanic expands to people from all Spanish-speaking countries, including Spain and Equatorial Guinea, which are not in the Americas or the Caribbean. At the same time, it excludes people in Latin America who are not from Spanish-speaking countries like Guyana, Suriname, Belize, Haiti, and even Brazil, the largest country in Latin America. If we use the term Hispanic when we mean to refer to all people from Latin America, we inadvertently exclude millions of people. A lack of inclusionary options has made filling out the census, job applications, school forms, and other paperwork accurately difficult for people who ID as Latinx but not Hispanic. Can also sometimes make finding community based on ethnic background difficult in the U.S. Additionally, Hispanic denies the ethnic diversity of indigenous people to the area. In most Central and South American countries, the majority of the population is mixed race, and considerable portions are indigenous. Hundreds of native languages are spoken all over Latin America by millions. This indigenous or mixed ethnicity is an important identity to many. Using the term Hispanic to refer to those people should be discouraged because it excludes and erases those who don't identify with colonizers or speak Spanish as their primary language. Latinx, Latino, Latina, and Latine still have their own issues, but have generally been considered more inclusive words. Instead of relying on colonizers and language to identify us, Latinx puts the focus on geographic location. If your origins are in Latin America, you can identify with Latinx. Hispanic is still a valid term, but check to make sure that it's being used appropriately. We asked folks to speak on some of the ways these two words have impacted their lives. Hello, can you introduce yourselves and tell us how you identify?
My name's Martin. I go by he, they pronouns. I identify as Brazilian American and Latinx. I'm a anthropology and international affairs student at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. I've been in the US since 2017, but I'm originally from São Paulo in Brazil.
Well, my name is Lauren. I am from Atlanta, Georgia, for the most part. My background, my entire family is from South America in country Guyana. And that has been a significant part of my identity and as how I identify as a Guyanese American woman. I have a twin sister, but so far as just basically the stuff that, I think that is most important to me. I would definitely say that I identify as being somebody that is Afro-Caribbean, and have always loved the idea of attaching to the identity of the Latinx culture, especially as it marries so well and is almost such a strong part of just African Caribbean. I just feel like those two cultures have always been interlinked in ways that we may not have ever even understood from centuries and centuries ago. Sometimes, even though I feel like there's parts of that identity that have been out of reach just based off of the box that we're forced to check, but just almost confine ourselves in based off of outside standards. I still strongly feel that that is a part of my identity and my lineage, and I'm proud to be.
How has the word Hispanic been detrimental to you? In what ways has this shown up in your own life?
The word Hispanic has always been something that's made me uncomfortable in the sense that it's something I don't identify with, I have never identified with, and it's something I really am unable to identify with. Being Brazilian in the US, a lot of people will like categorize me as Hispanic because they associate all Latinx people or all people from Latin America as Hispanic. And so I've often been grouped into that category mistakenly. But first off, I don't speak Spanish. Spanish is not my mother tongue. I speak Portuguese. Um, and so it's a term that's always felt very foreign to me. And receiving emails or having to fill out forms with Hispanic as the only option has always like made me feel rather uncomfortable, and it's something that felt like there was not a space for me to identify as to like claim my Latin Americanness, because Hispanic is such a Spanish centric and colonial centric term. Um, and so I and so that's how I feel towards the term Hispanic. And whenever people would be like, oh, like, do you want to join like this Hispanic group on campus? I'm like, well, like, I want to make connections with other Latin Americans, but I'm not Hispanic myself. So it's always made me like question my belonging as even as a Latino person in the US, um, because of this language barrier and this like identity classification barrier. Um, so I choose to identify as Latino or Latinx, and and there's and through this term and through this community, like I've found a lot of other Latin Americans in Portland who I really like connect with, and we're able to talk about these like issues of culture and belonging and also discrimination that we experience in the US through these communities. Um, and yeah, so that's, I hope that helps you understand why I identify as Hispanic and why I think that term should go. Another thing that I feel goes along with the term Hispanic and this Spanishization of Latin Americans in the US uh, happened to me in an interesting way. I go by Martin, and in Brazil we say Martin. That's how we pronounce it. Um, but half of my family is from the US and half is from Brazil. So I've used these both pronunciations depending on who I'm speaking with. And in the US, I generally introduce myself as Martin. Um, but a lot of people would assume, take it upon themselves to correct themselves to Martine. And it's something that always like caught my sight or like always made me like question, but it's never something that I like verbally expressed discomfort towards, at least not at first. Because I generally don't have like a problem with the way people call me, like, oh, I was like Martine, that's fine. But as time passed, I'm like, like that's not how you pronounce it. Like that's not how we say it in Martine. And so I was always like, am I like creating this fake identity, like Martine, like I'm not this person. And so I like started talking to my close friends and just like telling certain people who would call me Martine that I actually would prefer Martin. Um, and yeah, I think that goes along with this assumption that all Latin Americans are of Hispanic origin. Um, and it actually like in what many times you think you're like helping, like pronouncing someone's name the way you think it should be, but you should always listen to how they are pronouncing it and try to be mindful of that.
Well, it's limiting, and that's the biggest part of it. Imagery and association, we as human beings, we all learn by association in a lot of respects, and I think that comes significantly into play when we're talking about our other fellow humans and people we come into contact with. We tend to label specifically so that we can say, okay, I know what box to put you in or where to place you. So it's something that I understand, but in that Hispanic in that particular word, with its attachment and its root lineage going back into colonization, really, where you're thinking of Europeans that came over and colonized certain areas of the world. It seems to draw a direct line back to that only, and in so doing, very much so limits the people that are able to identify within that, underneath that umbrella, rather. So for me, and especially not being somebody that is a Spanish speaker, or a fluent Spanish speaker, and definitely not a native Spanish speaker, because of the fact that Guyana in South America is the only native English speaking country in the continent, it definitely kind of was one of those things that puts up an immediate wall, because it's just like saying, okay, we don't speak Spanish. That's the first check that kind of puts you out of the box. In some respects, because I am also Black, it is something that people will say, well, no, don't you have to be at least a fair skin? I won't necessarily say completely white, or, blonde hair, blue eyed, in that particular way of thinking of it. But it definitely is something that people want to sort of rule out, to say that you cannot be, or be a part of, specifically because of the term. And again, going back into the roots of where it comes from, it's just so unfortunate, because it's really paying homage to a group that essentially was able to capitalize off of Native people, and in so doing, essentially created all of these boxes that we now are saying, well, you cannot be a part of, and wanting to limit who is able to come underneath this umbrella. So that's been very, very challenging. I think previously we spoke, but I remember times when I was a kid, growing up, and it would be standardized testing time, and they would have Black, African American, and then Black slash, excuse me, Hispanic descent. And there was also another little box or area to check that was Latino or Latina, is how they put it specifically. Now we know, of course, it's supposed to be Latinx, more inclusive. But I remember literally being told by, this was just a teacher, I believe at the time, that, no, you can't check that box. That's not for you. And I didn't question it. It seemed kind of interesting, because I knew where my family came from, and I knew the influence that surrounds, my culture and the heritage that I, always learned about growing up. And it seemed confusing that somebody, a non-person of color, could kind of come up and say, no, that's not you. So maybe in the understanding of the word, we would be able to kind of see that Hispanic is just, it's just very limiting so far as thinking of Hispanic heritage. And the term Latinx just opens up such a huge range of people that can come together and say, yes, that's me too. So hoping that in doing these types of projects and in this work, we're able to sort of dismantle the attachment to the word Hispanic, and that being the covering under which this culture sits under, and open it up a little bit more widely to people that genuinely can fit very comfortably under that particular moniker. So yeah.
How has the word Latinx been empowering for you? Have you always identified that way?
It has been more empowering because it is more inclusive. I think I must say that wasn't straightforward in my case as well to identify as Latinx, because as Brazilian, we have this sort of aversion to the term Latinx, because in Brazil we associated like the term Latino itself with other Spanish speaking people in Latin America. And so because we're so often confused by foreigners, especially like people from like white people from the global north, as Spanish speaking, we have this very strong aversion to identifying as Latinx. So when I came to the US, I would tell people, no, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not Latinx, I'm not any of these, I'm Brazilian. But the more I met other Latin Americans, and the more like I started to create community and like friendships with these people, I understood like that there was something about our culture that was similar, and a sense of familiarity that I really like missed and longed for while living in the US. And it was through like, for example, Lewis and Clark has this group called Gente Latina Unida, that I started to like see myself more as Latinx and see myself as belonging to that community and having a place in that community. And so Latinx just became a term where I could be included because it doesn't refer specifically to what language you speak or who your colonizer is. It refers more to where you're from. And I'm, as like someone from Latin America, I feel like incorporated by that term. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I feel like that term is something I'm happy to identify with, which is something that doesn't happen for me with Latinx.
Um, More than anything, I think the more things that human beings are able to identify as, it breaks down these barriers where we just kind of are able to understand that we're not as different as we think that we are, right? So more than anything for me and with that, I truly believe in attaching to my culture and everything that brings to me. So even if it's in food and being able to share in like different types of recipes and the influences that come from all different places, or I mentioned music earlier and how that opens up such an array of artists, people that you may not have been exposed to because you're like, oh, okay, well, they wouldn't know anything about what I've gone through, or I'm not going to listen because there potentially is that language barrier. You start to understand that, like, outside of the language barrier, for instance, there are so many Latinx artists, people that have contributed to so many different social justice issues, for instance, that if we're able to kind of find that sense of camaraderie in the term, then to me, I think that's the most beneficial. And I would say it took a lot of, to your second question, just, how long I've identified as Latinx. It took a lot for me to kind of allow myself that privilege, right? Because, when you're being told or you think that people have the autonomy to basically be able to say, no, you're this and not this, then it almost takes away a sense of power in just being able to encapsulate who you are as a human being, because it's like the outside world decides for you. And then from there, you're left with, I guess, just that, what everyone else's perception is rather than how you see yourself. But in the trips that I've gotten to take home, Guyana being home, I've just started to understand so much more about the ties that bind us, and the influences that all cultures kind of have that bring us together. So, I mean, to me, I would say it's been a journey and one that I've gotten to embrace much more in my adult life, where I was open to making that exploration for myself. But it's just been so beneficial when you see how, for hundreds of years, Black and brown people have come together and worked under the same, just towards the same issues, I guess is what I would say, just towards the same issues of liberty, of freedom, of trying to, just radicalize what other people think of our own communities, and have done that in tandem with each other. So it's almost in essence paying homage to those that have gone before and who have kind of broken down those walls before us, and carrying on their legacy, if you will, by doing the exact same thing for generations and generations to come. We do need to come together. We do need to acknowledge what Latinx actually is, what it incorporates, and who's a part of it. No. And yeah, just really kind of take that back for our own. So
In summary, language holds a lot of power, especially socially. So, using language that fosters inclusivity and promotes diversity is a way to shift cultural norms. Learn about the words you use to describe people and make sure you use them accurately. Check to see if your word choice has positive connotations. It is good practice to ask your friends what language they prefer and how they identify themselves. Don't make assumptions. Participate in using language that challenges existing power structures. Educate yourself on people and language in Latin America.
well, I proudly say not Hispanic, Latinx.
Not Hispanic, Latinx.
Amazing.
All right, that's the best I got.